Compound Interest, a Mafia Omegaverse Romance, Chapter 1. Third time's a pattern the two men had been standing outside the campus noodle shop for 11 minutes. Suho knew because he'd been counting. The way he counted everything, spare change. Hours until his next shift. Days until rent. The exact number of times a stranger's shadow had crossed his peripheral vision on the walk from the bus stop. He recognized them immediately. Same black coats, same terrible attempt at looking casual, same nervous energy of men who had clearly never had to ask anyone anything in their lives and were bad at it now that they did. One kept checking his phone like it might rescue him. The other kept adjusting sunglasses that made no sense to wear at 7 in the evening, in autumn, under a sky already bruising toward dark. Third time this week. The first time, Monday, Suho had assumed they were lost. The second time, Tuesday, he'd assumed they were casing the shop for a robbery, which had briefly delighted him. A real crime, at least, something with narrative logic. By Thursday, he'd put it together. They weren't casing the shop. They were casing him, badly, the way people cased things when they'd been told to be subtle and had never once in their lives needed to be. He pushed through the shop's plastic curtain door, tucked his chin against the wind, and walked directly toward them instead of around them, which made both men startle like he'd broken some unspoken rule of the chase. Somewhere behind him, through the fogged window, his coworker Yuna was mouthing something that was almost certainly don't, which Suho ignored on principle. Yuna thought everything was a don't. Yuna once refused to reheat leftover rice past 30 seconds out of fear it would achieve consciousness. Okay, Suho said, stopping a foot away and crossing his arms. I'm going to save us all some time. Whatever question you're about to ask me, the answer is the same one I gave you Monday and the same one I gave your friend's friend on Tuesday. I don't know where Kang Minho is. I haven't heard from Kang Minho. I owe Kang Minho several months of unpaid dish duty and a security deposit, not the other way around. The taller of the two blinked. We didn't say anything yet. You didn't have to. You have the face. Suho gestured vaguely at both of them, taking in the full unfortunate ensemble. The whole, hovering, sunglasses at dusk, standing too close to noodle shop thing. It's very consistent branding, honestly. Whoever does your training should get a raise, because you two are, at minimum, memorable. That's half the battle in intimidation, I'd imagine, though the other half is probably not getting spotted 3 times by the person you're supposedly tailing. The shorter one opened his mouth. Suho held up a finger. I'm not finished. Here's what's going to happen if this becomes a 4th time. I go to campus security, who already think you're both weird because you loiter by the bike racks like a couple of malfunctioning statues. And then I go to actual police, and I file an actual report, and I use words like harassment and stalking, which, fun fact, are real crimes, unlike whatever debt collection cosplay this is. I'm a broke 21-year-old with a part-time job and a worse GPA. I am not a lead. I am a dead end with student loans and a strong understanding of my rights as a private citizen, one of which is not being followed to a noodle shop by men who dress like a funeral home's rejected mascots. Silence. The taller man looked at the shorter man. The shorter man looked at his shoes, and then, after a beat, at the taller man's shoes, as if hoping the shoes might have an answer he didn't. He hasn't called you at all? The taller one finally asked, and there was something almost pleading in it which threw Suho more than the threat would have. He'd expected menace. He'd braced for menace. He had not braced for a large man in an expensive coat sounding, for one unguarded second, genuinely tired. No, Suho said, softer now off balance. I promise. If he had, I'd probably turn him in myself just for the drama. I'm not protecting him out of loyalty. I don't even know where his stuff is. He left half his closet and took the good pillow, which honestly tells you everything about his priorities. The two men exchanged another look, some silent conversation Suho wasn't part of. And then, without another word, they turned and walked back toward the black car idling at the curb, its engine a low, patient hum that made the whole street feel briefly like the wrong movie. Suho watched it pull away and let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, his shoulders dropping an inch he hadn't noticed rising. Absolute weirdos, he muttered, and went back inside for his noodles, which were now cold, which felt like the real crime here. Yuna was waiting at the register, eyes enormous. You just talked to them. Do you know how insane that was? Do you know what those men probably do for a living? They stand outside noodle shops badly, Suho said, sliding back onto his stool. That's their whole resume as far as I'm concerned. If they wanted to actually scare me, they should have hired someone who's seen a movie. You're going to get us both killed. I'm going to get us both a slightly better tip average, actually, because I just performed a public service by not letting this place turn into a crime scene attraction. You're welcome. He picked his chopsticks back up. Now hush, I'm eating my sad, cold noodles in peace. Chapter 2. The roommate situation. To understand why two men in bad coats kept finding him, you had to understand Kang Minho. And to understand Kang Minho, you had to understand that some people were disasters in the way weather was a disaster. Not out of malice. Just an unstoppable, indifferent force that ruined your week regardless of your feelings about it. They'd been roommates for a year and a half. Split rent, split chores in theory, split a single working hair dryer that Minho had somehow managed to break twice and fix 0 times. Minho was charming in the specific way of people who'd never had to try, quick laugh, easy compliments, always this close to paying you back for something. A debt of his own that never quite arrived either. Suho had liked him, actually. That was the humiliating part in retrospect. Minho made bad instant coffee taste like an event. He remembered small things, that Suho hated cilantro, that Suho's exam weeks meant the shared fridge needed to stay stocked with the ugly off-brand energy drinks nobody else would touch. For a while, the apartment had felt less like a place Suho was surviving and more like a place he lived. Then, 3 weeks ago, Minho started coming home later. Then not at all. Then a text going to stay with a cousin for a bit. Don't worry about my half this month, I'll wire it. And then nothing. No cousin Suho had ever heard of, in a family Minho had described, at length and often, as consisting of exactly one aunt in another city and a grandmother he visited twice a year. No wire transfer. Just an empty room, an unpaid half of the electric bill, a single unwashed mug that had calcified into something geological, and apparently several deeply invested men in black coats. Suho had pieced together the shape of it from things half said in the hallway of their building. A betting ring, high stakes, the kind of debt that didn't get discussed at a bank. He remembered now, small red flags he'd filed under Minho being Minho. A phone that buzzed constantly and got silenced fast, a week where Minho hadn't slept right, a comment laughed off about one big win that'll fix everything. Minho had always had a system for winning, the way every gambler had a system right up until it cost them everything. And Suho, tired and busy and 21, had let it stay background noise because foreground noise, rent, exams, his own 3 jobs, had taken up all the space he had. He didn't know the number, didn't want to know the number. Numbers like that had a way of becoming his problem the second he learned them, the way gravity became your problem the second you looked down. What he did know, he had exactly one skill that had ever mattered in his life, and it wasn't economics. Despite the degree he was somehow still paying for on a scholarship that covered tuition and nothing resembling food. It was refusing, calmly and completely, to be anyone's easy target. He'd learned it the hard way, being an Omega in a city that assumed Omegas came pre-installed with a please, help me setting. Professors who spoke to him more slowly than his betas classmates. A landlord who'd once tried to negotiate rent down in exchange for company. Alphas on the bus who stood too close and smiled like proximity was a favor. He'd overwritten the setting, line by line, until fragile stopped being a word anyone tried on him twice. So when strange men showed up asking about Minho, Suho didn't panic. He filed paperwork in his head. Not my debt, not my problem. Redirect and repeat. He said the same thing to his advisor when she asked, gently, if everything was all right at home, fine, just a roommate situation. The kind of phrase that could mean anything from a dish-duty dispute to what it actually meant, and which nobody ever pushed on because who had the energy to push on a college student's vague deflections? He just hadn't expected the debt to have a face that would actually listen. Or more precisely, he hadn't expected the debt's owner to be a face at all. A man with a name and a coat and a habit of ordering the wrong drink, sitting 3 feet away from him 4 nights a week, learning the shape of his temper like it was something worth studying. Chapter 3. The man who ordered wrong the noodle shop had a strict, unspoken hierarchy of regulars, and Suho, who worked the register 3 nights a week to cover what his scholarship didn't, knew all of them by their orders, not their names. There was egg roll extra sauce, who tipped in exact change and complained about the weather regardless of weather. There was the elderly couple who split one bowl and somehow made it look like the most romantic meal in the city. There was study group table 4. 6 students who ordered 1 pot of tea between them and stayed for 4 hours, which the owner tolerated because one of them was his niece. The new one was black coffee, no sugar, ice even in winter, and he broke the hierarchy by ordering it at a noodle shop, which had exactly one type of beverage on the menu. that being tea, prominently listed, in a font Suho had personally helped redesign the previous summer for extra cash. "We don't have coffee," Suho told him the first night, not looking up from the register, already bracing for an argument he'd had 100 times with 100 entitled customers who thought menus were suggestions. "I know," the man said. Suho looked up. Dark eyes, unreasonably calm, like he'd never once in his life had to raise his voice to be heard. Tailored coat that had no business existing within 5 blocks of a place that used plastic stools and paper napkins from a bulk supplier. He looked less like a customer and more like a photograph of a customer that had wandered into the wrong establishment. "Then why did you order it? To see what you'd say." Suho stared at him for a long moment, chopsticks paused mid-motion where he'd been rolling silverware into napkins. "That's an insane reason to order anything. Get the tea. It's better anyway, the coffee here would probably be a war crime. We don't even have a machine. I'd have to microwave instant granules in hot water and serve it to you with a straight face. And I refuse to do that to a paying customer. My conscience won't allow it." The man's mouth did something, not quite a smile, more like the idea of one filed away for later, the way you'd note a good restaurant to come back to. "Tea, then?" He left an absurd tip, enough to cover a week of Suho's bus fare, dropped without ceremony into the jar like it was nothing, like it hadn't just solved a small, specific worry that had been sitting in Suho's chest since Monday. Suho pocketed the memory of it without comment, because pride was for people who didn't have a $340 textbook bill due Friday, and gratitude was a luxury he rationed as carefully as everything else. He came back the next night, and the next. By the 4th visit, Suho had stopped pretending it was strange and started treating it like a recurring inconvenience he had opinions about, the way he had opinions about the bus schedule and his professor's grading curve and the specific injustice of instant ramen prices rising 2 years running. "You're sitting in the corner booth again," Suho said, dropping his tea down harder than necessary, close enough to slosh but not quite spilling, a skill he'd perfected out of spite over many shifts. "That's the busboy's cleaning zone. Move to table 6 or I'm charging you a loitering fee." "There's no loitering fee." "There is now. I just invented it. Congratulations, you're the first customer to ever pay it. This is a historic moment for the shop. I might frame the receipt." The almost smile again. He moved to table 6 without argument, which somehow annoyed Suho more than resistance would have. He'd had a whole retort loaded, 3 lines deep, and now had nowhere to put it. "What's your name?" Suho asked, mostly so he could stop calling him Black Coffee in his head, which had started to feel less like a joke and more like an actual gap he wanted filled. "Jiho," the man said after the smallest pause, like he was deciding whether to lie and choosing for once not to. "Just Jiho, no last name, very mysterious. Very I read too many noir novels and decided to become one. You can call me whatever you like. I'm calling you difficult customer until you earn a promotion. Understood?" He said it so seriously that Suho almost laughed, caught himself, scowled instead, and went back to the register feeling unaccountably pleased with himself, humming under his breath in a way Yuna clocked immediately and refused to comment on out loud, though her eyebrows did quite a lot of talking on her behalf for the rest of the shift. Chapter 4, bossing an Enigma it became, without either of them agreeing to it, a routine. Jiho showed up. Suho bossed him around, move seats, stop staring, use a coaster, don't tip that much it's weird. Wear a coat that isn't 50 times nicer than everything else in this building, or you're going to make the other regulars feel bad about their lives. No, you can't have extra chili oil on a night when the delivery's late. That's not fair to Egg Roll Extra Sauce, who's been rationing his portion like it's a wartime resource. Jiho took every instruction with the same unbothered calm, occasionally with that ghost of amusement that Suho was starting to actively hunt for, like a game with rules only he understood. A private scoring system he never announced but always kept. "You're very bossy for someone who serves tea for a living," Jiho said one night, watching Suho reorganize the shop's entire condiment shelf out of sheer restless energy between customers, alphabetizing sauces that had no earthly reason to be alphabetized. "I'm bossy for a human, the tea thing is incidental. Someone has to have opinions in this economy, and everyone else seems to have given up. You should see my group project partners. Absolute ghosts, and not the cool, mysterious kind, just the kind who don't reply to messages for 6 days and then act surprised when I've redone the whole slide deck myself." Suho straightened a bottle of chili oil with more force than it required, angling the label to face precisely forward. "Also, I noticed you didn't deny it, the bossy thing. I don't see the point in denying accurate things. Wow, groundbreaking philosophy, write a book. Call it sitting quietly while a college student yells at you about condiments. It'll do numbers. I'm considering it. Suho snorted despite himself, and something in his chest loosened a fraction, the specific relief of making someone laugh, or the closest thing this particular someone did to laughing, which was a kind of stillness that got very slightly warmer around the eyes. Some nights it was quiet between them, comfortable in a way Suho didn't examine too closely. Jiho would read actual paper books, thick ones, spines already broken in, while Suho did homework at the counter when the shop was slow, the two of them existing in the same small space without needing to fill it. Other nights it was a performance neither of them scripted, but both of them showed up ready to play. You've read that same page for 10 minutes, Suho said once, peering over. Either it's incredible or you're not actually reading. Both are possible. Which is it? I'm watching you argue with a customer about portion sizes. It's better than the book. Suho whipped around, mortified, to find egg roll extra sauce nodding sagely at him from 2 tables over, having apparently already forgiven the whole exchange. That customer was wrong, actually. The large bowl comes with 6 pieces. It says so right there on the... I know. You explained it very thoroughly. Twice, because he needed to hear it twice, clearly, since the first time didn't take. There was something magnetic about how little Jiho gave away. Not in the way that made Suho nervous, exactly, but in the way an unsolved equation made him want to keep working the numbers until something resolved. Some X finally isolated on its own side of the page. He asked Jiho what he did for a living. Jiho said imports. Suho asked imports of what? Jiho said depends on the week. And something about the way he said it made Suho decide, quietly, not to push. The same instinct that told him not to touch a stove even before anyone said it was hot. A caution that didn't come from fear, exactly, more from some old, careful part of himself that had learned to leave certain doors shut until he was ready for what was behind them. He should have pushed harder. He'd think that later with real feeling, turning the memory over and over like a coin he couldn't decide the value of. But for now, it was just a boy bullying a strange, calm man into using a coaster, and liking, more than he wanted to admit, the fact that someone finally did every single thing he told them to do, not out of fear, but like it was a small offering he chose to give over and over, patient as tide. There was one night, near the end of that stretch, when the shop lost power for 20 minutes. A fuse somewhere in the building's ancient wiring, the owner cursing over the breaker box while the whole street outside stayed lit and unbothered. Suho lit the emergency candles they kept for exactly this reason, and found Jiho still sitting at table 6 in the dark, entirely unbothered, watching the flickering light instead of his phone like a man with nowhere else he'd rather be. You could have left, Suho said, setting a candle down between them, the small flame throwing soft gold across Jiho's face and making him look, for once less like a photograph and more like an actual person who could be startled or moved. Most people would have left. Free tea isn't worth sitting in the dark for. I wasn't staying for the tea. That's not as smooth a line as you think it is. Most of the time you can't even get the tea without me handing it to you. I'm aware. That might be part of it. He said it so plainly, without any of the practiced weight a normal person might have loaded into a line like that Suho didn't have a comeback ready, which almost never happened, and which he blamed, later, entirely on the candlelight and the power outage and absolutely nothing else. You're doing the thing again, Suho said instead, deflecting. The unreadable thing. It's very inconvenient for a person who's trying to have a conversation with you. What would you prefer? I don't know, readable. Like everyone else. Give me something to work with. Jiho considered this with the same gravity he seemed to give everything, like Suho had asked him to restructure a shipping contract instead of just be a little more obvious about liking someone. I think you're the most interesting thing that's happened to me in longer than I'd like to admit, he said finally, and I don't know what to do with that information, so I've been coming back every night instead of figuring it out. The power came back on exactly then, fluorescent light flooding the room, and Suho was almost grateful for the excuse to look away and busy himself blowing out the candle, cheeks burning in a way that had nothing to do with the flame. Chapter 5. An uncomfortable pattern. It was Suho's economics professor, of all people, who cracked something open. Hand Jiho, Professor An said, tapping a slide on organized crime's effect on regional trade. A guest lecture unit morbidly popular, the kind of class where even the students who skipped everything else showed up early to get a seat. Third generation holding company officially. Import-export, logistics, private security contracting. He clicked to the next slide, a corporate headshot too polished to be recent, a face too calm to be anyone else's. Unofficially, he shrugged, the shrug of a man who valued his continued employment and had decided wisely to say only what a lecture slide could defend. Unofficially, ask anyone in this city who actually runs the docks. Suho's pen stopped moving. Imports, depends on the week. He told himself it was a common name. He told himself the city was big, that there were probably a dozen hands in logistics alone, that his professor's headshot was grainy and corporate photos never looked like the actual person. He told himself several other things on the walk home, practical things, deflecting things, the kind of things you tell yourself specifically because you don't believe them and need the extra effort to keep pretending. None of which survived contact with the black car parked, again, outside his building. The same two men from before, except this time they weren't looking for him. They were opening the door for someone else. Jiho stepped out, looked up, saw Suho standing on the sidewalk with his tote bag and his expression very carefully arranged into nothing at all, the same blankness he'd perfected for landlords and rude customers and every alpha who'd ever stood too close on a bus. For one long second, nobody said anything. The street held its breath around them, a car passing somewhere blocks away, the buzz of a dying street lamp, Suho's own pulse loud enough to embarrass him. "You're the one they work for," Suho said. Not a question. Jiho didn't insult him by denying it. That somehow was worse. "Yes. You've been coming to my shop for 3 weeks." Suho's voice cracked slightly on the number, 3 weeks suddenly feeling both impossibly short and unbearably long, a whole relationship's worth of tea and banter compressed into something he now had to recalculate entirely. "Yes, was it about Minho this whole time? Was I just bait, a stakeout with extra steps? Did you sit at table 6 and let me boss you around about coasters while your men stood outside asking me the same questions in shifts? Good cop, bad cop, except both cops wear the same terrible sunglasses." "No." For the first time since Suho had met him, Jiho's calm cracked just slightly. Around the edges, something that looked almost like worry about being misunderstood, an expression that sat wrong on a face built for stillness. "It started that way. It stopped being that within the first 10 minutes of the first night. You told me my coat was aggressively expensive and made me sit at table 6. I came back the second night because I wanted to see what you'd say next, not because I expected Minho to walk through the door. That's not an excuse. It's not meant to be one. It's just true. You should have told me. The second it stopped being about Minho, you should have said something. Instead, you let me." Suho stopped himself, jaw tight, refusing to finish the sentence with the word that wanted to come next. Something closer to care about you than he was willing to hand over in the middle of a sidewalk to a man who ran a private army out of a legitimate-looking holding company. "I know," Jiho said quietly. "I've replayed several versions of that conversation. None of them started well. I chose silence because I'm a coward about exactly one thing, apparently, and it turned out to be this." Suho's chest hurt in a way he didn't have a name for, not fear, though there should have been fear, and not quite betrayal, though there was some of that too. Mostly it was the specific ache of realizing something he'd let himself enjoy had a much larger, much darker shape than he'd known. And he'd been standing inside it the whole time without noticing the walls, humming to himself while the architecture rearranged around him. "Don't come to the shop anymore," he said, and went inside before his voice could do anything humiliating, taking the stairs 2 at a time despite the ache already climbing up the back of his throat, refusing, on principle, on pride, on every ounce of the careful person he'd built himself into, to cry over a man who owned a coat that expensive. Chapter 6. The quiet weeks Jiho didn't come to the shop. Suho told himself this was a relief for 6 consecutive days, with the same conviction he told himself the vending machine on the 3rd floor of the library was definitely going to give him his dollar back one of these days, a belief maintained entirely through stubbornness rather than evidence. His life in the absence of a mafia boss quietly not smiling in a corner booth went back to its regular chaos. 2 jobs, 1 degree, a roommate-shaped hole in his apartment and his budget both, groceries measured out in careful mental columns, laundry done at the hour when the machines were cheapest. He picked up extra tutoring hours, a nervous freshman who needed help with statistics, and paid in cash and gratitude in roughly equal measure. He learned to make rice stretch 4 ways, discovered a fondness for a discount grocery brand of frozen dumplings that Yuna insisted tasted like cardboard and Suho insisted tasted like survival. Yuna, some of us don't have the luxury of taste. He got very good at not thinking about a specific empty table, at rerouting his eyes past it the second he walked in, at pretending the corner of the shop hadn't developed a small, persistent gravity all its own. He noticed things he hadn't let himself notice before, now that there was room to notice them. That the tip jar felt lighter without a certain regular's careless generosity, though he refused to admit that was the reason he'd started counting it twice. That table 6 sat empty most nights, and that egg roll extra sauce had started eyeing it like real estate he wasn't quite bold enough to claim. That his own hands, folding napkins during slow stretches, kept folding one extra than he needed, an old habit resettling into a groove that had briefly held a second person. Minho didn't call. Neither did the men in bad coats, which Suho registered uneasily as its own kind of message. Either the search had ended, or it had escalated somewhere he wasn't being told about. It was on day 7, walking home past midnight from his tutoring gig, backpack heavy with a stats textbook he half-hated, that the black car found him anyway, except this time it wasn't idling smugly at a curb. It was parked crooked, one wheel half up on the sidewalk, door open, and the taller of the two lackeys. Suho had started thinking of him as coat 1 somewhere around week 2. A private taxonomy he'd never admit to keeping was crouched beside it looking genuinely, unactorishly panicked. The kind of panic that didn't know how to perform itself because it had never needed to before. "You need to come with us," coat 1 said, no theater in it now, his voice pitched too high too fast. "Absolutely not. New policy, remember? Police harassment the whole." "It's about Minho," he surfaced. "He's hurt and he's asking for you by name, and boss said if you won't come voluntarily to make you understand it's not optional this time." Suho's stomach dropped through the sidewalk, every ounce of righteous refusal evaporating on contact with the word hurt. "He's hurt how? Get in the car and find out." Every instinct Suho owned, the ones that had kept him sharp-tongued and untouchable through 21 years of being underestimated, screamed that getting into unmarked cars for men in bad coats was, structurally, a terrible life decision, the kind of decision that showed up in the true crime documentaries his roommate used to fall asleep to. He got in anyway, because hurt wasn't a word you could argue with, no matter how angry you still were at the man who owned the car. Chapter 7. What the debt actually was. The building they took him to wasn't cinematic, no dim warehouse, no dramatic single bulb swinging over a chair. It was an office, expensively boring, glass and steel, the kind of place that suggested its danger through the total absence of any decoration that might give something away, all clean lines and unmarked doors. A lobby with exactly one plant and no receptionist, because a receptionist would imply the building expected walk-ins. Minho was in a side room, arm in a temporary sling, a bruise blooming along his jaw and shades of violet already going yellow at the edges, looking smaller than Suho had ever seen him. Smaller than the boy who used to take up an entire couch with his limbs sprawled everywhere. Smaller than the boy who once talked his way out of a parking ticket through sheer force of charisma. He burst into tears the second he saw Suho's face, which, infuriatingly, predictably, made Suho the one comforting him. Even now, even after everything, some old muscle memory of roommate-shaped affection kicking in before his anger could catch up. "I'm so sorry," Minho kept saying, words tumbling over each other, wet and fast. "I didn't think it would actually come back to you. I thought if I just disappeared long enough it'd. I don't know what I thought. I thought I had more time. I thought one more hand would fix it. I always think that, and I know how stupid that sounds saying it out loud to your face right now. You thought running would fix it, because running has fixed every other consequence in your entire life," Suho said, sharper than he meant to, exhaustion making his voice shake more than he wanted it to. "What happened to your arm?" "I tried to win it back, went bigger, lost bigger." Minho's laugh cracked halfway through, more sob than humor. "Turns out the people I owe don't love a sequel. They came to collect from a guy who'd already sold everything worth selling, which apparently makes people creative about what they take instead." Suho sat down heavily in the chair across from him, all the fury he'd been carrying since the sidewalk suddenly nowhere to put, redirected instead into a kind of tired, familiar exasperation, the specific flavor reserved only for Minho. "You absolute, do you understand what you put me through? Men following me to my job. My job, Minho, the one place I have left that isn't complicated. I had to threaten to call the police on grown men because you decided the solution to a debt was one more bet. I know. You don't get to just know. Knowing doesn't fix the electric bill you left me holding. Knowing doesn't unscare Yuna, who now flinches every time the shop door opens too fast. Knowing doesn't give me back the version of this semester where I wasn't constantly doing math in my head, about whether I'm about to become collateral damage in somebody else's card game. The door opened. Jiho stepped in, and something in Suho's chest did an unwelcome, complicated thing at the sight of him. Relief and anger arriving at exactly the same time, like they'd carpooled and refused to sit apart. "He's stable," Jiho said, to Suho specifically, ignoring Minho entirely in a way that felt deliberate, a courtesy extended to the person he actually owed an explanation to. "The debt is being handled through the organization's internal process, which is more paperwork and interest restructuring than violence. Generally, tonight was a rogue lender jumping the process, someone outside my direct chain who thought he could collect early and keep the difference. He's already been dealt with. Minho isn't in danger from us. He asked for you because you're the only address he remembers that doesn't belong to someone he owes money to." "You said generally," Suho said, arms crossed, refusing to let the relief in his chest soften his voice too much. "As in, not always. I run a legitimate holding company on paper and an organization with real weight underneath it. I won't pretend to you that no one's ever been hurt under my name. I would be lying, and you'd know it, and I'd rather you be angry at true things than comfortable with false ones." Jiho's voice didn't waver, though something in his jaw tightened, the effort of holding a difficult honesty steady instead of softening it into something easier to hear. "I can tell you that you were never going to be one of the people it happened to. I made sure of that before I ever let myself sit in that corner booth a second time. The men who came to your shop were told, explicitly, to ask and leave. If either of them had ever laid a hand on you, they wouldn't still work for me. You don't get to make sure of things about my life without telling me. That's not romantic, that's just managing me. I've had a lifetime of people trying to manage me because I'm an Omega, and apparently that comes with a handle with care sticker nobody asked me if I wanted. Professors who explain things twice like I won't get it the first time. Landlords who think sweetheart is a rent negotiation tactic. I built an entire personality specifically so nobody would ever get to quietly decide things on my behalf again. And you did it anyway. You just did it nicely, which somehow makes it worse, because I didn't even notice until it was already done." "I know." Something in his face actually moved, finally, cracking that careful stillness all the way open. The mask he'd worn so consistently across weeks of tea, and coasters finally showing the tired, uncertain thing underneath it. "That's exactly why I never told you. Not because I thought you were fragile. Because I knew the second you found out, you'd assume I was one more person trying to run your life instead of the one person who'd finally learned not to. I watched you refuse help from 3 separate people in that shop over small things, bus fare, a ride home in the rain, someone offering to carry your bag up the stairs. And every time, some part of me thought, good, don't let them, you don't need it. I liked you exactly as you were before I knew a single thing about the debt. I still do. That part was never a strategy." Suho opened his mouth to argue and found, humiliatingly, that he didn't have one ready, the sharp retort he usually kept loaded sitting useless in his chest. Disarmed by the specific, careful honesty of a man who had clearly thought about this longer than Suho had let himself believe. Chapter 8. Terms and conditions. They settled it like a negotiation, because that was the only language Suho fully trusted, and he suspected, watching Jiho actually pull out a notepad without a hint of irony, the only language Jiho fully respected. Minho had been moved to another room to sleep off the adrenaline crash under the watch of a Dr. Jiho's organization, apparently kept on retainer, which told Suho more about the scale of this whole operation than he wanted to sit with right now. It was 2 in the morning. The office had gone quiet in the particular way buildings did after midnight, all its daytime pretense of ordinary business stripped away to something more honest. "Minho's debt gets restructured, not forgiven," Suho said, ticking items off on his fingers in the empty office, pacing a little because sitting still had never once helped him think. "He pays it back slowly with actual interest, but no rogue lenders, no broken arms. He learns an actual lesson instead of just learning that consequences eventually stop chasing him if he waits long enough. I want a real payment schedule in writing, something he can't wriggle out of with charm because charm is his whole survival strategy, and I refuse to let it work on this." "Agreed." Jiho wrote something down, unhurried, like this were any ordinary contract negotiation, and not a conversation happening at 2 in the morning between a mafia boss and a college student who'd shown up in the same sweater he'd worn to a 9 a.m. lecture. "I'm not moving into some penthouse or getting taken care of. I have a degree to finish and a spine to keep. If we do this, and I haven't said we're doing this, I keep my jobs, my apartment, my life. You don't get to fund me into gratitude. I've seen what happens to people who let someone else pay for their independence. It disappears so slowly they don't notice until it's gone, and I like my independence exactly the size it currently is, thank you. I wasn't going to offer. I like the version of you that argues with a vending machine over $1. I'm not interested in erasing him to replace him with someone easier to manage. Suho's ears went hot. He pushed forward before it could show on his face. You tell me the truth from now on, all of it, even the ugly parts. I don't need a sanitized boyfriend. I need someone who trusts me with reality, because I have spent my entire life being told half of things by people who thought the other half would break me, and it never once made me feel protected. It just made me feel small and lied to at the same time, which is a genuinely terrible combination. Agreed, Jiho said again, quieter this time, though I should mention I've never had a boyfriend, sanitized or otherwise, so you may need to be patient with the learning curve. My education in this area is structurally non-existent. I know how to negotiate a shipping dispute. I know considerably less about what happens after the word boyfriend gets said out loud in a room. Oh, we are not starting this on a curve. I don't do curves. I do a syllabus with clear deliverables and immediate consequences for late assignments. You'll adjust. Understood, Jiho said, and the almost smile finally, fully arrived, the real one, the one Suho had been quietly cataloging for weeks without admitting it, the one that changed his whole face into something younger and less armored. I've always tested well. Don't get smug about it, that's a red flag in a syllabus context. Suho crossed his arms, softening despite himself, some of the day's exhaustion finally settling into something closer to relief than dread. One more thing, if your men ever follow me again without telling me first, for any reason, safety included, I want a text. A normal text like a person, not a black car appearing out of nowhere like the street, personally decided to menace me. I've had enough unscheduled cardiovascular events this month. I'll have Coat 1 draft you a warning template, Jiho said, entirely straight-faced, and it took Suho a full 3 seconds to realize he was being teased, at which point he threw a balled-up napkin at him from across the desk with more affection than force. Don't you dare call him that to his actual face. His name is probably something normal like Tiang, you absolute menace. His name is Tiang. I know that, I was making a point. You guessed correctly, though. I'm impressed. I'm always right, this is not new information, please catch up. There was a pause after that, comfortable rather than awkward, the kind that had become familiar over the last few hours of paperwork and negotiation and careful, exhausted honesty. Outside the office window, the city had gone properly quiet, the specific hush of 3 in the morning, when even the restless parts of a place finally admit they're tired. Can I ask you something? Suho said, quieter now, some of the sharpness worn down by the hour. Why me? Out of everyone who's ever served you tea badly or argued with you about a coaster. There must have been other people who caught your attention before. You can't tell me a man like you gets to 26 without anyone ever trying. There were people who tried, Jiho said, after a moment, choosing the words with the same care he gave everything. Most of them tried by making themselves smaller around me. Softer. Easier to be near because they assumed that's what someone like me would want. Something that wouldn't push back, wouldn't ask questions, wouldn't risk the temper of a man they'd heard rumors about. You did the opposite from the first night. You made me sit somewhere I wasn't sitting. You told me my coat was ridiculous. You've never once in 3 weeks adjusted yourself to be easier around me, even after you found out exactly what I am. He looked at Suho directly then, none of the usual distance in it. I didn't know how much I wanted that until you did it without trying. Suho didn't have anything clever to say to that, which was rare enough that he let the silence sit instead of filling it. Some old defensive reflex finally, quietly, standing down. Well, he said eventually, voice a little rough. Don't get used to it, I still plan on being difficult. I'd be disappointed if you weren't. Chapter 9, 6 months later, the noodle shop hadn't changed. Suho had graduated, barely, gloriously. On a scholarship he'd fought a dozen bureaucrats to keep, walking across a stage in a rented gown that fit badly and mattered enormously, and still worked the register 2 nights a week out of what he insisted was loyalty to the owner. And everyone else insisted was because Table 6 had sentimental value nobody could pry out of him with a crowbar. Minho had a new job at a print shop across town. A payment plan he actually kept up with. Jiho's organization had a way of making sure people kept up with things, though Suho had learned not to ask too many follow-up questions about the mechanism. and an ongoing, deeply committed grudge against every casino within city limits, which he referenced constantly, the way recovering addicts sometimes needed to keep naming the thing to stay clear of it. He and Suho argued on the phone twice a week, mostly about whether Minho was eating enough vegetables, which both of them had, without discussing it, decided counted as reconciliation. Jiho still came in most nights, still ordered tea, though everyone at the shop now knew to bring it without asking. The order permanently retired from needing to be spoken. Still sat at table 6, still wore coats that made the other regulars feel financially inadequate. Egg roll extra sauce had once asked, with real sincerity, whether Jiho did tailoring recommendations, and Jiho had answered with such genuine thoughtfulness that egg roll extra sauce now owned 2 blazers he had no occasion to wear. Jiho still received Suho's instructions with the same grave, unwavering compliance that had first made Suho suspicious of him, and now made Suho, quietly, unreasonably fond. The coasters, the seating arrangements, the running list of small rules that had less to do with actual necessity, and more to do with the private language they'd built between them. A whole vocabulary of bossing and complying that meant something warmer than either word suggested. "You're slouching," Suho said, dropping into the seat across from him at the end of his shift, stealing a sip of tea that was, obviously, correctly, already made exactly the way he liked it. The great terrifying ghost of the docks slouching in public, scandalous. Somebody call the papers if the papers were the kind of publication that covered posture crimes. "I've been informed my posture is under new management." "Damn right it is." Suho stretched, tired in the specific satisfied way of a full shift finally ending, and let his head drop onto Jiho's shoulder without ceremony, the way he'd never have allowed anyone else to be that close, that easily. "You're still on probation, by the way, 40 coasters. I'm keeping count." "I know." Jiho's arm came around him, careful in the way it always was, not because he thought Suho was breakable, Suho understood now, but because he'd learned exactly how much Suho liked being held, and how little he tolerated being managed, and had spent 6 months learning precisely where that line lived, adjusting himself around it with the same patient attention he'd once given a notepad full of negotiated terms. "You mentioned it repeatedly. Good. Someone has to keep the books balanced around here, and it's clearly not going to be you. You gave me a coaster budget with no cap. That's terrible fiscal policy. I've been told my spending habits require oversight." "You've been told correctly." Suho closed his eyes, letting the shop's noise wash over him, the hiss of the kitchen. Yuna laughing at something 2 tables over. The particular clatter of chopsticks against bowls that had become the soundtrack of an entire chapter of his life. He hadn't expected, and wouldn't trade now for anything steadier. "How's Tiang, by the way? Tell him I said the sunglasses thing was genuinely one of the worst tactical decisions I've ever witnessed, and I include several of my own group project choices in that ranking. He'll be thrilled to hear it. He still brings it up unprompted, usually as a joke, though I suspect there's a real apology buried somewhere in there he hasn't figured out how to say properly. Tell him it's fine. Tell him he can buy me noodles sometime and we'll call it even." Suho paused, considering. "Extra sauce, though. He owes me that much for the trauma. I'll relay the terms." "Good. You're getting better at this negotiating thing. I might promote you past difficult customer eventually." "I look forward to it." Outside, the city moved through its ordinary chaos, cars, neon, the low hum of a place that never fully slept, the same restless energy that had once carried 2 men in bad coats to a sidewalk outside this exact shop and started, without either of them choosing it, everything that came after. Inside, at table 6, an Omega who had never once let anyone run his life sat with an Alpha who had learned, the hard way, that the only kind of loyalty worth having was the kind you never had to force. The debt, in the end, had never been the point. It had just been the excuse the universe used to introduce them. The end.